From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones.
I felt like I was going to be sick. I couldn't catch my breath. And so at that point, Rob phoned the maternity assessment unit. This was the fourth time that we spoke to them.
Way back on Monday's episode, we introduced you to Katie and Rob. They know more than most about the crisis that's still unfolding in England's NHS maternity care. In 2021, they were expecting their first child, Abigail, and throughout the pregnancy, they didn't have any problems. All seemed well. Until Katie went into labour and she started bleeding. They called the hospital 4 times, in fact, and each time they were told not to worry. But taking the initiative, Rob persisted and he called again.
I basically explained what I could see in front of me, that that she was struggling for breath, had gone clammy, was pale, had blue lips, couldn't speak, she couldn't get a word out, which is why I was, the one talking to the midwife. They didn't really respond as if they were listening to what I was saying. They didn't get the seriousness of it. And she ended the call basically saying, well, you could come in, but there's no rush.
They did rush, in a taxi, all the way to the hospital. But by that point, Katie was so unwell, she went into cardiac arrest and had an emergency C-section and was put into a coma. Rob was left to bounce anxiously between the neonatal intensive care unit, where his daughter was, and the bedside of his wife.
I was woken up in intensive care and told that my baby was dying. And I can't really explain what that was like. I'd gone from the happiest I've ever been, thinking I was going into hospital to bring my daughter home, to the worst possible news, to the point where I sort of thought to myself, this has to be a nightmare.
An inquest found the cause of Abigail's death was failings in care. And tragically, this is not an entirely uncommon experience. More than half of maternity units across England are deemed not safe, and hundreds of mothers and babies have died as a result. Last June, the government, in the shape of Health Secretary Wes Streeting, launched a review into 12 trusts across England, including the one that failed Abigail, Katie and Rob. Today, the review has published its interim findings. We'll get into what they have found and what Katie and Rob make of it.
I feel frustrated and a bit disappointed. To me, it doesn't feel like our experiences are front and centre.
The story today, Inside England's Maternity Scandal, Part 2.
My name's Eleanor Hayward and I'm the health editor at The Times.
How long has this story been running for you?
It's been running for years and years. There's been several major NHS maternity reviews in the time I've been covering health, which is about 6 years. And I think almost the depressing thing about this is I doubt this is going to be the last. And there are hopes it will be, but many of the themes, many of the issues identified in this report are almost identical to those identified in all the previous reports we've had.
And also the shocking thing, I guess, as well, is that this isn't just a few high-profile bad cases that are dragging the whole of NHS England maternity care down. There's a sense that actually there are quite widespread problems for a lot of people. On that point, can I read you something that we got from a listener who heard the episode that we did with your colleague Poppy on Monday? She says, hi podcast team, I wanted to say thank you for your reporting on maternity care in England. It was incredibly sad to listen to the stories of families who experienced traumatic and tragic outcomes. If it's possible to pass on thanks and admiration to those families for sharing their experiences, I'd be grateful if you could do so. I had 2 babies at a major teaching hospital and leading centre for fetal medicine in 2019 and 2021. While I thankfully left the hospital with 2 healthy boys, my experiences of delivering them were deeply scarring. Anecdotally, based on conversation with friends, I believe my experience sits somewhere between average and average to bad. There's no headline ending here, but it beggars belief that maternity care in this country can be so inconsistent and at times so uncaring There were bright patches, individual midwives, nurses and doctors. I still think of a kind anaesthetist during my elder son's birth as a saint, but overall I left the hospital in shock on both occasions. I still shudder when I think about a failed induction attempt and the cruelty of one midwife, staff visibly frustrated when I vomited in the operating theatre, being left alone post-delivery with no information while my first son was taken to neonatal ICU. Pain relief, limited paracetamol, rarely being delivered, breakfast eventually arriving at 11 a.m, and being judged for asking a midwife to give my desperately hungry second son a bottle because I was so exhausted I feared I might drop him, for fear that it would interfere with my breastfeeding. I breastfed both my children for a year. When you're a fully healthy, competent adult who subscribes to and pays fully into the NHS, and this is the experience at one of the most critical moments in your life, it is profoundly disappointing. Thank you again. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's so sad that that's what she went through, and it's also so sad that that's, like she said, it's average to poor. I mean, it's very rare that you hear someone who's had an absolutely amazing experience start to finish on maternity. I mean, there's plenty of people who have healthy babies and have good-ish experiences, but kind of these, like she was saying about not being given breakfast, not just a kind of lack of compassion at every stage, just appears to be the norm. So even when technically everything turns out all right in the end, you have healthy babies and the care is not what you would want it to be.
This government, like previous ones, wants to change things, and we've got this latest review. We've had the interim report of this Valerie Amos review. Just explain for us, first of all, how this actually came about.
This was ordered last summer by Wes Streeting. Like I said, there's been so many maternity reviews. This was intended to be kind of a national review, looking at the broad picture, because a lot of the previous reviews have looked at specific hospitals. So he ordered the Labour peer Baroness Amos to do a wide-ranging investigation focusing on 12 underperforming NHS trusts and kind of taking national lessons from that. This is her interim findings, reporting on what's been going wrong, but it's not got any actual recommendations. So a final report is due in the spring, which will have hopefully some like sort of quite clear-cut recommendations and ways the NHS can act.
And the whole idea of this review, has that been well received by families who've had bad times in NHS maternity care?
I'd say it's been a mixed response. There's a few different things going on. I mean, one of the key criticisms of this review, which I have a lot of sympathy with, is we actually know what a lot of the problems are. We know there aren't enough midwives. We know there's structural racism that means Black and Asian women are treated worse. We know that facilities aren't up to scratch, and we know that women aren't listened to. Why do we need another review to tell us those things we already know? There's an argument to make that this review is wasted time. If they'd issued some recommendations, changed the law, that might have had more material impact on maternity care than kind of doing another wide-ranging review. There's also some families, particularly, are saying they want a statutory public inquiry into maternity care, and so they're saying this review is ultimately a bit toothless. It's not got the actual power to order witnesses and to enact change.
Let's get into some of the things, obvious or not, that's in this interim report. What for you is the sort of key takeaway from it?
There were a couple of things that really stood out to me. I think the level of racism that Amos reports was really shocking. I mean, we've known for a long time that Black women are several times more likely to die, and Black babies have worse outcomes. And the review was saying that some kind of NHS staff stereotype women. So Asian women, in one case, were called princesses, and kind of the idea they can't deal with the pain very well. They just complain. And then for Black women, it's they're thick-skinned, they're tough, they don't need pain relief, which is, obviously absolutely appalling. And then just other elements of the cover-up culture. And one thing that I found really distressing to read was that there's a system in the NHS where if your baby is stillborn, which means they die while still inside the womb, then there's no inquest. A coroner never investigates the death.
Because they didn't become a person?
Yeah, because they were stillborn, whereas if your baby is born and then dies shortly after birth, they qualify for a coroner's inquest. And the report said that this basically incentivises the NHS to report deaths as stillborns, not as neonatal deaths. So some families said that they thought their babies were alive when they were born, when they saw signs of life, but their baby was classified as a stillborn. Not only has their child died, they are told they can't have an inquest, and they're also kind of tormented, like, was my baby alive? I thought they were alive. And there was one case where a woman gave birth, staff performed CPR on her baby for half an hour, but she was told the baby was stillborn. But she was like, well, why would you do CPR on a stillborn baby? And this kind of like lack of transparency, lack of openness.
Oh, gaslighting.
Gaslighting is part of like this huge cover-up culture that means women are kept in the dark. Women are often the ones who end up blaming themselves. They're like, oh, I've done something wrong. This is my fault, when actually it's the hospital that has failed them.
There are also criticisms about just capacity as well. Just
Yeah.
there not being the right number of staff, the right kind of staff on shift for various instances.
Yeah, one of the big things that came through is that when there aren't enough staff, which is basically all the time, staff will get diverted from like postnatal care to delivery wards. And, delivery wards is where things are probably most acute, so where staff should be prioritised. But that means that if you're a woman who's just given birth and you're on a postnatal ward for a couple of days, you're really struggling to get the help you get, because the staff who should be looking after you are actually on the delivery ward. At every stage of pregnancy and birth, women are denied an appropriate amount of help.
And does any of that, in your mind or in Baroness Amos's mind, account for the lack of compassion that we see reported quite a lot? Because, does being understaffed make you mean and unlistening to a desperate mother? Does, I don't know, all these other issues actually end up with you throwing a face at them and the rest?
Yeah, I think she raises this issue of it being a culture, and several things contribute to that culture. And on the one hand, it is morale and not having enough time, because like midwives and nurses on these wards are really struggling as well. They're having to care for too many people. They're running from one person to another, and they're stressed. And then there was quite an interesting bit in the report about some midwives feel so ashamed to be midwives at the moment because of all the maternity scandals. So one said that, they take their midwife badge off when they leave the hospital because they feel sort of guilty. But the culture on the wards is terrible, and I think it starts at the top as well. Other reviews have found quite a lot of divisions between the consultants, the doctors and the midwives, and a lack of communication, and some bullying in some cases, racism. Most maternity wards don't sound like great places to work.
No. And we should say that this is not necessarily just a few very poor incidents that are sticking out. It seems like it's suggesting that broadly there are these kind of issues in lots of these places, in lots of these parts of the NHS. Reading the report, did it ring true to you, the whole thing?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really emerged over the past few years is initially maternity scandals, it would be like one bad apple. So it would be like, I think the Shrewsbury and Telford review, I think that was 3 or 4 years ago now. And there was an East Kent review the year after, and they were looking at 2 specific hospitals where hundreds of babies' mums had died, been harmed avoidably. And at the time, it was sort of like, it's gone terribly wrong at this hospital, but elsewhere you're probably okay. And then since then, more and more scandals have come up at more and more hospitals. There's an inquiry into Leeds, into Oxford, into Nottingham. And so the more hospitals come up, the more you think, oh, this isn't an isolated incident. This is a cultural failing in maternity affecting the whole of England, the whole of the NHS. And so, national solutions are needed, which is where this report is trying to fix things.
The interim report into Baroness Amos's enormous, speedy review into maternity care in England makes for some very shocking and concerning reading. And when the details were first revealed last night, our health reporter, Poppy Koronka, who we spoke to on Monday's episode, got back on the phone with Katie and Rob. Their newborn daughter died shortly after birth because of failings in care. What did they make of the further light being shone on this crisis?
So how was it today for you reading the report and going through everything? Are you doing okay?
Yeah, I feel frustrated and a bit disappointed by the fact that this interim report says a lot of information that we already know in terms of the problems of maternity. There's no attempt yet to draw any conclusions about what is causing these problems and how to fix them.
I feel like it's almost giving trusts some excuses. It lists understaffing and COVID as possible reasons for issues, but they are not the root cause of the issues. They're excuses for poor management in the first place.
Was there anything in there that it felt cathartic for you to read, for her to say, to acknowledge, or anything like that? Or was it just pure frustration?
One thing that struck me is the fact that there is not actually a section about avoidable harm and death. I would have expected to see a bit of commentary on kind of themes from episodes of harm and baby deaths. We know in our Sussex group that there are similarities between cases. And so it feels a little bit strange to me that there hasn't been an attempt to draw together any of those in this report, particularly if our experiences are meant to be at the heart of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you speak to Baroness Amos yet? Were you part of any of those listening exercises?
Yes, we had a meeting with her earlier this month. Our Sussex group actually had 2 meetings, one with a member of her investigation team and one with her. So we know that she has heard from Sussex families the kind of depth of harm, and not just in terms of our babies dying, but the cruelty that a lot of us experienced after that happened, and the compounded trauma of that.
I guess in your case, are we talking about you calling them multiple times and them not inviting you in? Is that the kind of thing that you wanted to see more of in terms of that? Because that's happened to so many people that I've spoken to. Is that something that you felt you want to have reflected?
So, yeah, so the key one for us and the one that played a big part in Abigail dying is around telephone triage and the fact that there are no national guidelines for that in England.
I really hope that gets pulled out as an improvement that could happen nationwide in the final report. And having the guidelines is one thing, but then also making sure that all the trusts across England are using those guidelines and making the most of them. That could have prevented what happened to us happening.
Yeah, and I think that's also the case that a lot of families find that guidelines weren't followed in their situations, and that's what's caused their baby to die. And again, that is something you might think would have been drawn out, the fact that for some reason some staff aren't following guidelines, and how can we ensure that they are? What is it that is stopping them from doing that? I think a big similarity in all of our cases is mums not being listened to when they're reporting symptoms. Either they're just completely disregarded, or it seems to be the case that midwives are normalising symptoms, and that's their expectation that this is not a serious problem. And then it turns out it's actually catastrophic and it causes a baby to die. In some cases, it also causes mums to end up in ICU.
It's, not listening. And I guess it's a sort of thinking they know best. I mean, in Katie's case, her labour was low risk, but it's low risk until it isn't. On paper, Katie shouldn't have had any major issues. But we know that she did, so the midwives need to be prepared for, and re-risk assess people.
Do you think sometimes they overlook low risk pregnancies for sort of these things that can go wrong.
Yeah, definitely.
And worried first-time mums, when first-time mums are presenting symptoms that they're worried about, the first thing the midwives do is go, oh, you're a first-time mum, it's okay, trust me. That type of response that doesn't really have a place, I don't think, in a modern maternity service.
And in our case, I was low risk. It would have said that on the notes that they were looking at. And I think that enabled them to have a confidence that they shouldn't have had about my symptoms and about how my pregnancy was likely to progress. In some ways, I don't think that is a way we should be categorising pregnancies, because your pregnancy bears no relation on what will happen during your labour and birth. And having that on my notes was incredibly unhelpful. And maybe if I was high risk, they would have responded differently. And the other big thing that we obviously spoke about in the first podcast is the kind of natural birth ideology. And there's no mention of that in this report. And to me, that's just such a key thing that really needs to be looked at. And I don't know what the answer is, but my feeling is that it's a big part of the problem, the idea that women should have this natural, pain-free, kind of idyllic experience that is not the reality for the vast majority of us, and yet is perpetuated by maternity units.
That's the big cultural issue that's not mentioned. Cultural issues are talked about in the report, but she doesn't go into the culture of natural birthing ideology.
Yeah, because it forms such a big part of so many people's stories. Going from having met with her and her team a couple of times, coming out of those meetings, did you feel hopeful that they were listening?
She was listening in our meeting and she was taking notes. She didn't give much away, though. Looked like she was, focused on the job, if you like. We didn't get much emotional or sort of other feedback from her during the event. And we had a 2-hour meeting with 6 families detailing every aspect of their poor care where they were harmed. And it was extremely emotional. And it wiped us out, basically. It was another traumatizing event for all of us.
It must feel, like you said, frustrating, but to the utmost degree to have to go through that again and then feel like it's not even reflected in this, what you've been through. If you were to say anything to, Wes Truting or Baroness Amos, perhaps, going forward in this review, what would you say?
Yeah, it is frustrating. And for me, I feel that the only way to fix maternity services in this country is through a public inquiry. And that is because we can't have these kind of surface level reviews. There's so much to what's going wrong in maternity services, but no one has ever managed to get to the root of it. I don't believe that this investigation is going to do that, especially not having seen this report. And I just feel that we're wasting time, and what we should be doing is getting on with a public inquiry so that we can be compelling evidence from the regulators, from trusts, from midwifery educators, and properly getting to the root causes and coming up with solutions that are actually going to work and are going to fundamentally change the way that maternity is run in England. So many women and families have such awful experiences, but we're not doing anything to try and change it. Not really. We're just expecting that families just deal with this stuff as just part of having a family. To me, it's a scandal and it should be treated as a scandal. And that's another reason a public inquiry would be far preferable, because it will put it on the public stage and it will make everyone look at it closely and properly.
We did reach out to Sussex University Hospitals Trust about the care that Katie and Rob received. They told us they had met with the family to personally offer their heartfelt condolences and sincere apologies for the loss of their daughter Abigail. The Trust said that they remain firmly committed to listening, learning and improving the care they provide. Since 2022, they say that they have introduced several important changes, including strengthening the triage process so that they can respond more rapidly to early signs of concerns. Eleanor, it sounds like Rob and Katie, talking to Poppy there, felt very let down by what was in this report. Is that the kind of thing you've heard from other parents affected by poor maternity care in England?
So I think families, they're just desperate for something to change. There's things that could be acted upon now, whether that's investing in infrastructure on maternity wards, because one thing in the report that came out was that it literally rains on some maternity wards because the roofs are falling down.
And that they were including weather reports in some handovers because it was like if heavy rain's coming, people need to know because it might dribble through into the ward.
Yeah, if it's going to rain tomorrow, you might not be able to give birth, sort of thing.
Gosh.
I think obviously there are some families who are really just don't think it can be good enough. There are others who are a bit more mixed and saying, well, if this is the maternity report that's going to be acted upon, then we'll get behind it. But I think everyone recognises that this is a bit of a crossroads. And if, when the final report comes out in spring, the government act really decisively, put a lot of money into maternity care and change things, it could be a bit of a starting point for then widespread reform. But I think, everyone would say if this isn't properly acted on, then it's kind of inexcusable.
One of the things that it sounds like Rob and Katie think might actually bring in more accountability and kickstart reform would be a public inquiry. You sort of touched on that earlier. How likely would it be that actually happens?
It's quite interesting this morning, actually. Baroness Amos said she wasn't ruling out recommending a statutory inquiry. She said she's not decided yet if she will recommend that. And I think Wes Streeting also, he clearly doesn't particularly want to go down that route, or he would have ordered one last summer, but he's not ruled it out either. I don't know. I think a lot of it will depend on how strong the final report of this is, and if those recommendations are kind of radical enough to achieve the change that people think is needed.
Because of the pros and cons that it would cost a lot and might take ages, but could compel witnesses by force of law to come and tell the truth.
Yeah. Another issue, it's kind of a bit separate, is whether statutory inquiries achieve anything. If you think the COVID inquiry is going on now, and that's obviously got a lot of criticism, I think other people will say, no, we just want solid action. The more and more investigations aren't necessarily going to help.
And what actually will happen with this? I take your point that this interim report is shedding more light on something we broadly knew anyway, and when actually her full recommendations come out in the spring, that's adding to a pile of potentially similar recommendations that have already been made. What might the government do? Have the government responded to this already? What's the plan?
So Wes Streeting responded to this report yesterday. He said he will use the findings to launch a national maternity and neonatal task force, and this task force will develop a new action plan.
So hang on, so we've had individual investigations, inquiries into individual trusts. We've now got a sort of broadly England-wide trust. We've had interim findings from that. He's going to launch a task force to come up with a plan, and then they're going to do something.
Yeah. The thing that really frustrates me about this is I'm in my 30s. I'm at the age where a lot of my friends are having children, thinking about having children. It's the sort of wasted time. Some of these findings, like hiring more midwives, investing in infrastructure, why couldn't they have been done 3 or 4 years ago?
Well, I should say, in Wes Streeting's statement, he did go on to say that the government has already, quote, recruited over 800 more midwives and is investing over £140 million to address critical safety risks on the maternity estate and is rolling out guidance to tackle the leading causes of maternal death. Does any of that touch the sides, do you think, when we're thinking about the scale of the problem?
Yeah, I guess it's better than nothing, isn't it? I think it'll be interesting to see how quickly this new action plan is formulated and how quickly it's acted upon. Things like cultural change are going to take time. The report makes really stark warnings about structural racism. How is that addressed? And I think anything that could be put into place now, or anything where you need to get the ball rolling now, everyone would be grateful if that could get going straight away.
So actually your point is, just finally, that if you want to turn around this enormous issue, it's not a case of just turning on the money taps and pumping in cash and getting everything new and up to scratch. Yeah. There are big, thorny issues like toxic culture that need reckoning with as well.
Toxic culture and just kind of like not listening to women in general comes through in every single report. and cover-ups as well, time and time again, that the only way people get answers about what went wrong in their care is by getting lawyers and suing the hospital. And often families don't want that. If someone had sat them down and just been like, this is a terrible mistake made by the hospital, they wouldn't have had to go through all that. They wouldn't have had to battle to find out the truth. And I think people often compare sort of maternity to the airline industry, where in the airline industry, there's a no-fault system. And if anything goes wrong, it's laid out really transparently straight away. Whereas in the NHS, if anything goes wrong, it's instantly hidden and covered up and you can't get the truth. And then it prevents people learning from it.
That was Eleanor Hayward, health editor at The Times, and we also heard from Times health reporter Poppy Koronka. And thanks as well to Katie Fowler and Robert Miller for sharing their incredibly upsetting story with us. That is it from us today. Thanks for your company. Today's producer was Micaela Arneson, the executive producer was Taryn Siegel, and sound design and theme composition were by Maula Seto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.